What if you could invest in ETFs that absolutely crush the S&P 500 and have done so for the last decade? In today's video, that is exactly what we're going to be looking at. We're going to break down the three fund portfolio. And of course, in this video, we're going to be looking at the growth section and looking at the ETFs that I personally do invest in one of the three of these. So let's go ahead and break this down. The S&P 500 is a good, safe way to invest in the stock market. And when you think of investing in the 500 largest companies in the United States, you instantly have diversification. You instantly have really risk mitigation, which is huge. And of course, market leading returns with a very, very low expense ratio. But in today's video, we want to break down three ETFs that have crushed the S&P 500 over the last 10 years. Now, looking at the first one, it is the Invesco QQQ Trust. Looking at the last 10 years, we are at a 442% return. That is right. You have 4x your money in the last decade if you are invested into this Invesco QQQ. Now, in the last decade, of course, we have seen a massive rise of technology. We have seen a massive rise of artificial intelligence. This is focused in growth stocks. Again, thinking of that three fund portfolio, we have kind of our basic, our foundational. This is the growth stock. When you think of the S&P 500, which is an index, this one actually follows the NASDAQ 100, which contains the top non-financial stocks on the NASDAQ stock market. So it is a little bit different. They are really focused in the growth orientation, very, very best and brightest, and also very heavy in the tech sector is where we see these now. Of course, with technology, there can be a lot of volatility, but when you look at some of the largest mega cap companies in the United States, you're talking about Nvidia, you're looking at Apple, you're talking about Microsoft. These are really behemoths in the industry. And when you think about performance and future performance, even looking at the next 5 to 10 years with the chips, the artificial intelligence that's coming out, also with all of these supercomputers that are going to be and essentially being built right now. Quantum computing, there are so many things that are going to be really reliant on these large tech companies, which means we are going to see continued growth. Now with this ETF, of course, isn't a slam dunk to really outperform the market because there can be some ups and downs with this. And this is one that you want to hold for 5 to 10 years at a minimum, because when you start looking at tech is about 50% of the total holding of the QQQ, which of course, this is one, if you've seen my portfolio video, this is one that I do hold. I do hold the QQQM, which is of course the managed part of this, works incredibly well. Second one we look at is the iShares US Technology ETF. Now you thought the last one was pretty good. This one has returned a 553% return. That is right, you are 5.5x over the last 10 years. So it is kind of crazy. When you think of the total returns for that Invesco QQQ Trust in the 10 years, the iShares US Technology ETF, which is focused entirely on tech stocks, including 140 different companies. But there is something bigger and different with this one because, of course, very similar. It is a bit top heavy. 45% of it is devoted into three single companies, which we have Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia. And of course, by comparison, it allocates only 25% to growth stocks. So again, a little bit different because they are more heavy weighted in the technology. And again, thinking of those large three, they have been dominating for an extended amount of time. Now, of course, when you start looking at diversification, 140 holdings is pretty good. But when you think of putting this, let's say even a younger age, this could be 50% of your portfolio. You have your foundation in there. You also do have your dividends in there. You have your HD, the VYM, whichever one you choose. This could make a big difference if you're seeing exponential growth for 10 or 20 years within these ETFs, which of course could absolutely explode as we continue that technology sector. And the final one we look at, the third ETF, is the Technology Sector or Select Sector Spider Fund, SPDR, the Spider Fund, 549% return. That is right. Over the last 10 years, it is almost 5.5x as well, which again is kind of crazy to think the tech sector. Now, again, this one has a little bit of a different spin on it. So I want to make sure that I explain this properly. So it is another very top heavy fund. Again, looking in the difference, big difference between this one is this ETF has Microsoft and Nvidia, which is 42% of the total holdings. Apple represents 4.8. Now, this is by design. So there is a very, very small percentage that is actually holding Apple within this portfolio due to their concentration rules that they have with this ETF. The ETF avoids having three top heavy stocks accounting for more than 50% of the portfolio, which we did see in our last ETF. There was just over a 50% portfolio. And of course, it never allocates or never allows a single stock to be more than 20% of the portfolio. And in the case of Microsoft and Nvidia, two stocks are taking up a significant portion of the fund, meaning there's not enough room in there to pick up that big percentage of Apple, because that would take it over this 50% rule that they do have in place with the ETF. And of course, this one, in comparison to other ones, only has 67 holdings in the ETF, which is the least diversified option of all three of these ETFs. Now, of course, it does contain the word technology. It doesn't mean that it's carrying every major technology stock. And of course, it really defines on how it is classified. When you start looking at Alphabet, which we know as Google, they're considered a communication stock, and that way it's not included in the fund because this is only tech side. And again, this is only technology select sector. So they are really looking at specifically this ETF and the way that it's built. Now, of course, while the technology select doesn't include all of the top tech stocks from that S&P 500, it has a potential to be far more volatile. So you really have to remember that and take that with a grain of salt, because there is such a stronger concentration within the companies that has, again, only holding a few companies, 67 holdings in total versus 140 of another one. And again, this is something when tech stocks are doing incredibly well, we're going to see these three ETFs just absolutely soar. They are going to crush it. If you're doing your research, if you're looking at what these companies have, what these companies are bringing to the market, it's almost unfathomable when you start looking at exactly how they're going to be built. And again, thinking of my portfolio personally, I do hold the Invesco QQQ. Now, a lot of people say, why do I only hold Vanguard funds? That is not true at all. And I just want to kind of share with you, I do hold the HD, which we know is Charles Schwab. I do hold the Invesco QQQ, which we know is through Invesco. There are a lot of other ones out there. And the big reason, guys, when you start looking at a lot of the Vanguard funds, including some of the other ones kind of outside of the Vanguard wheelhouse, they have an incredibly low expense ratio, which is the reason why I do those ETFs versus doing the managed funds. So when you start looking at the mutual funds, when you start looking at the managed funds, there is a fee that is associated with it. And usually it is 1%. Sometimes we see 1.5%. And the chances are a majority of, and I know statistically speaking, roughly 90% of investment advisors cannot outperform the index, and they do not outperform the index even if they build the portfolios themselves. And of course, there are some exceptions to this rule, like Warren Buffett. Depending where you're putting money, depending when you're putting your money in there, it can make a big difference in the investment portfolio and also seeing the return. But again, when you think of the three that we looked at right here, the Invesco QQQ Trust, with a 442% over the 10 years, iShare US Technology ETF sitting at 553%. And then, of course, the Technology Select Sector Spider Fund at 549%. Historically, when you look at ETFs, when you look at investing, you're looking at about a 7-year time frame to double your money. But when you start looking big picture, if you're getting a 500% return, you're doubling your money and compounding that money over and over and over again over a 10-year frame, which means these stocks are really poised to explode. And of course, my portfolio for where I'm at, I still have a majority still into these tech stocks, into these really big growth stocks. That way, when we start getting closer to retirement, putting more into kind of a little bit more of the S&P 500, but also putting some into those dividend ETFs as well. So, all right, guys, so that is going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. And as always, thank you guys for watching.